My name is Rachel Donovan. I was 31 years old the night I stopped being someone's daughter and finally became my own person. It happened on a rainy Thursday in late November, the kind where the sky felt too heavy to hold anything but secrets. I had come home to Cedar Hills, Kentucky for Thanksgiving weekend, not out of affection or excitement, but out of habit. That night, I was lying awake in my childhood bedroom, now stripped bare of every trace of me, a hollow guest room with beige walls, when I heard voices downstairs. My father's voice sharp and low, my brother Kyle's voice lazy and smug. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I had gone down quietly for a glass of water when their words froze me in place. "She's got that fancy job now," my father was saying. "The condo, the savings. Don't worry, we'll make Rachel pay for everything." "Everything for what?" Kyle laughed. "Are you sure she'll fall for it?" "She always wants to be included, doesn't she?" my father said. "We'll pitch it like an investment. Some kind of family business opportunity. She'll bite." I pressed my back against the hallway wall, my breath caught between rage and disbelief. The weight of those words didn't just sting, they shattered something in me. And I knew right then this wasn't my family anymore. Maybe it never had been. Growing up, I always thought I understood betrayal. I had seen the favoritism, the inequality, the endless excuses made for Kyle, and the silent expectations placed on me. But this was a deliberate scheme. A plan to manipulate me, a way to bleed me dry without ever asking for permission. They weren't even ashamed. That was what gutted me most. They were whispering not in panic, not in guilt, but with calm confidence, as if this were just another household decision. Like what to cook for dinner, like it was normal to use your daughter as a bank account. And in that moment, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I planned. Because if they thought I'd roll over and sign my life away, they'd forgotten the most important thing about me. I learned how to survive in this family without anyone ever handing me a damn thing. And if you've ever stood in the shadows of your own home, listening to the people you love plotting to tear down everything you've built, then maybe you understand this moment better than most. If you've ever had to protect yourself from the very people who were supposed to protect you, leave a like and stay with me. What happened next changed everything. I quietly returned upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed, staring into the dark. I should have been angry, furious maybe, but all I felt was clarity, the kind of clarity that only shows up when there's no illusion left to shield you. I had spent a lifetime trying to prove I was good enough for their attention, their pride, their love, and yet none of it had ever really been for me. It had been to stay in their good graces, to keep from being discarded. But now I was already discarded, this time behind my back with a price tag attached. The next few hours would be the most important of my life, and what I did with that pain, it wasn't just revenge. It was reclamation of my name, of my boundaries, of my life. That night something snapped, but not in a broken way, in a powerful, irreversible awakening way. And that, I believe, is when the real story began. I wish I could tell you that what I heard that night came as a complete shock. But the truth is, part of me had always known. The betrayal didn't start with that conversation between my father and Kyle. It started a long time ago, back when I was just a kid who learned very quickly that love in our house was conditional, and fairness was a myth reserved for storybooks. From the time I could remember, I was the responsible one. The one who remembered dentist appointments and packed her own lunch. I learned how to do laundry by the age of 10, not because I was curious, but because no one else would wash my clothes if I didn't. My parents didn't call it neglect, they called it independence. "You're so mature," they'd say, with a proud smile, not realizing they were praising me for learning how to live without them. Kyle, on the other hand, was the golden boy. 5 years younger and somehow light years ahead in my parents' eyes. While I was expected to keep straight A's and never cause trouble, Kyle could skip homework, mouth off to teachers, and still be praised for being creative or just going through a phase. I got a secondhand backpack every school year. Kyle. He got new ones in his favorite colors along with matching sneakers. I remember one Christmas when I was 15. All I wanted was a set of drawing pencils. I had been sketching in my notebooks for months, pouring my feelings into each line and shadow. That morning, I unwrapped a box of off-brand pencils and a used sketchbook. I smiled and said thank you, trying not to show the ache in my chest. 2 hours later, Kyle opened a brand new gaming console with 4 games and a headset. My mom turned to me and said, "Your brother's had a rough year. He needed a win." I guess I didn't. But the moment that really sealed my role in the family came when I turned 17. I had been accepted to a pre-college summer program at a university in Ohio. It was competitive, it was prestigious, and it came with a partial scholarship. The only catch, I needed $200 to cover housing and travel. When I brought it up at dinner, my parents didn't even look up from their plates. "We're tight right now," my dad mumbled. "Maybe next year." 2 months later, they handed Kyle a check for $2,000 so he could attend a 2-week robotics camp in California. He wasn't even interested in robotics, but he got the check anyway. Over the years, I tried to justify it. He's younger, I'd tell myself. Maybe they're trying harder with him. Maybe they're just more affectionate now. I told myself that maybe if I kept being the easy child, the good one, they'd see me. They'd value me the way they did him. But nothing changed. When I got into college, I didn't even ask for help. I had learned my lesson. I applied for every grant, every work study, every odd job I could find. I waited tables, worked in the campus library, and even cleaned houses during winter break. Meanwhile, Kyle got a new car for his high school graduation and totaled it within 6 months. My parents laughed it off. Boys and their toys, my mom said. I didn't laugh. I endured. I moved to New York after college with 2 suitcases and $3,000 to my name. I shared an apartment with 2 strangers in Queens, ate instant noodles for weeks, and worked 14-hour days at an entry-level marketing firm that barely covered rent. But I was free. And when the promotions came, first assistant manager, then director, I didn't call my parents to share the news. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew it wouldn't matter. They would smile, politely ask about Kyle, and remind me to stay humble. So yes, when I heard my father say we'll make Rachel pay for everything, I wasn't surprised. What I was done. Completely, absolutely done. Done hoping they'd change. Done begging to be seen. Done bending just to be allowed to stand next to a brother who had always stood on my shoulders. And that's when the fire in me lit. Because this time I wouldn't just walk away quietly. This time I'd reclaim every piece of myself they ever tried to ignore. The next morning, the world looked different. Not because anything had changed outside, but because something inside me had. For the first time, I wasn't seeing my family through the soft lens of nostalgia or hope. I was seeing them clearly, and clarity is a heavy thing to carry. At breakfast, the kitchen smelled like cinnamon rolls and coffee, just like every holiday morning growing up. My mom stood at the stove, humming softly, flipping bacon with that practiced ease. My dad sat at the table with his phone scrolling as if nothing in the world needed his attention. Kyle wandered in late still in sweatpants, yawning like he'd just returned from a war. "Morning," I said, calm but detached. "Hey sis," Kyle mumbled, reaching straight for the orange juice. My mother didn't even glance at me. "We'll need to head out around noon if we want to beat traffic to Grandma's," she said to no one in particular. I sat down and watched them. These people I had once desperately tried to impress, tried to earn praise from. My family or the actors who had always played the role. And I realized something: they didn't know me at all. They didn't know about the 16-hour days I'd put in to land my first client. They didn't know I had just been shortlisted for a national marketing award. They didn't know that my condo was almost paid off, or that I had single-handedly built a financial portfolio larger than either of them had ever dreamed of. Because they had never asked. Everything they ever knew about me was filtered through comparison. Rachel's doing okay, but Kyle's finally finding his stride. Rachel works a lot, but Kyle's trying his best. I wasn't their daughter. I was a benchmark, a barometer, a background player in Kyle's never-ending main event. After breakfast, I offered to help with dishes. Old habits die hard. My mother handed me a towel, still not meeting my eyes. "Are you okay, Rachel?" she asked finally, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm fine," I replied, drying a plate. "Just didn't sleep much." She didn't push, she never did. But later that day, as we drove to my grandmother's house, Kyle sat beside me in the back seat, scrolling his phone. And then, almost like a scene from a movie he hadn't studied for, he leaned over and said, "Hey, I heard Dad's gonna pitch you on the investment thing after dinner." I stared at him, stunned by the casualness. "You know," he continued, "the franchise thing. Real estate, I think. Just go with it. It'll help all of us." He said it like I was part of the team. Like I hadn't just overheard the whole plan less than 12 hours ago. "What makes you think I'd go with it?" I asked, my voice low. He shrugged. "Because you always do." There it was. The truth in 4 words. Because I always do. I always picked up the check. I always stayed late to help. I always gave the benefit of the doubt. I was the fixer, the peacemaker, the problem solver. and now I was supposed to be the financier of his mistakes. But I just nodded and looked out the window. Because I needed time. Time to finish my plan. And time to build the courage to walk away for real this time. I spent that afternoon at Grandma's smiling for pictures, answering shallow questions about work, and watching as Kyle bragged about crypto investments he didn't understand. My parents beamed at him like he'd won a Nobel Prize. When we got back home that night, I excused myself early, citing a fake headache. I wasn't lying. My head did ache from the weight of history, from the pull of a role I was about to abandon forever. Upstairs in that impersonal guest room, I pulled out my laptop. Not to scroll, not to distract, but to act. Because the Rachel they thought they knew, the one who always said yes, was gone. And the woman sitting here now, she wasn't going to let them take a single thing more. By the time the house had gone quiet that night, my plan was already in motion. I sat cross-legged on the bed, the glow of my laptop, the only light in the room, my fingers moving with focused calm. I wasn't panicking, I was preparing. That's the difference between surviving and fighting back. When you survive, you endure. When you fight back, you build strategy. I had spent my entire life surviving their favoritism. Now it was time to fight for myself. First, I pulled up my bank accounts. There were 5 in total, spread across 3 different institutions. I'd set them up that way years ago, out of habit, out of fear. When you grow up never being someone's priority, you learn how to protect your peace in small, quiet ways. I started by transferring my largest savings from the shared national bank, where my parents also had accounts, into a credit union I knew they'd never heard of. Then, I reset all passwords using a secure password manager, nothing with birthdays or pet names or anything Kyle might remember from childhood. Next came the credit cards. I called the 24-hour fraud alert hotline and requested a temporary freeze on new charges. I didn't need to say much. Just, I'm concerned about possible unauthorized activity, and the representative began the process without question. A new card would be shipped to my condo in Brooklyn, the one address no one else in my family had ever visited. After that, I opened a secure folder on my desktop titled Firewall and began documenting everything: dates, names, what I heard, what I suspected. I screenshotted the last few texts Kyle had sent me about business opportunities and flagged an old email from my dad that casually referenced how smart it would be for the family to have a shared investment account someday. I knew I might need evidence later, not just to protect my assets, but to protect myself emotionally. Because the gaslighting would come. It always did. We were just trying to help. You misunderstood. It was for the good of the family. Those words were loaded cannons in my house, designed to make me question myself, to pull me back into submission. Not this time. I wasn't just defending my money. I was reclaiming my worth. By 3:30 a.m., I had filed a freeze with all 3 major credit bureaus: Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. It was a process I'd learned during a financial literacy seminar at work, one that had helped women protect themselves from abusive partners or manipulative relatives. At the time, I never thought I'd use it on my own parents. I booked an emergency consultation with an estate attorney in New York. Then I sent an encrypted message to my financial advisor requesting a private meeting first thing Monday morning. The subject line read, "Security concerns. Confidential." I didn't need to spell it out. She was sharp. She'd read between the lines. And then I sat back, hands in my lap, staring into the quiet room that used to be mine. The floral comforter, the beige carpet, the cheap wall art that said home is where the heart is. It all looked unfamiliar now, as if the house had never belonged to me at all. And maybe it hadn't. Maybe I had been clinging to a fantasy that one day they'd love me the way they loved Kyle. That one day I'd get the apology, the embrace, the pride in their eyes. But the truth was simple and devastating. I had spent my life trying to be enough for people who never intended to see me. And now I wasn't interested in being seen. I was interested in being safe. I left my parents a note that morning. It said, "Emergency at work. Had to return early. Thanks for the weekend." No apology, no guilt, just distance. Because if you've ever had to plan your own escape from the people who raised you, you know it's not just about leaving the house. It's about leaving behind the version of yourself they created. By the time the sun peeked over the horizon, I was checked into a hotel 15 miles from my parents' house, drinking bitter hotel coffee and waiting for my early flight back to New York. I hadn't slept a minute, but I wasn't tired. My nerves were humming, not from fear, but from something more electric: clarity, resolve. I watched my phone buzz with missed calls. First from my mom. then from my dad, then 3 in a row from Kyle. I didn't answer. I didn't even read the texts. I had already seen the script before, concern masking control, confusion disguising entitlement. This time I wouldn't be pulled back in. As I boarded the flight, I looked out the window at the sleepy town I'd grown up in. The football field, the diner with the best cherry pie, the street where I learned to ride a bike. And I realized I wasn't homesick, because it had never truly been home. Home wasn't just a structure with walls and family photos. It was safety, respect, mutual care. What I'd known was just a staging ground, a place where I performed the role of the good daughter while my brother got to be the chosen one. When I landed back in New York, I stepped into my apartment like I was stepping into armor. The hardwood floors, the framed quotes on the wall, my oversized couch slightly worn but mine. Every inch of this place had been earned, not inherited, not handed down, not signed off by a parent's approval. That afternoon, I met with my financial advisor, Monica. She had been my silent ally for 3 years, sharp, discreet, and always one step ahead. As soon as I walked into her office, she gave me a long, knowing look. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. I told her about the overheard conversation, about the plan to coerce me into taking out a $40,000 loan under the guise of a family investment, about the debt Kyle had racked up from online gambling and how my parents had decided I was the solution. Monica's face didn't change. She'd heard versions of this before, I was sure. She nodded slowly, taking notes, then leaned forward. "You did the right thing. Let's make sure they can't touch a single cent." In the next hour, we locked down everything. We removed my parents as emergency contacts on every account. We set up verbal passwords and multi-factor authentication on all logins. We flagged my credit report to alert me of any attempts to open accounts in my name. We even began the process of rewriting my will, replacing family beneficiaries with charitable foundations I actually believed in. By the time I left her office, I felt like I had secured not just my finances, but my future. And yet that night, as I curled up on the couch with a bowl of soup and silence surrounding me, a strange heaviness crept in. Not regret, just grief. A grief I had never allowed myself to fully feel. I cried. For the little girl who thought good grades would earn hugs. For the teenager who worked 2 jobs while Kyle crashed his 3rd car. For the woman who thought maybe success would finally make her parents proud. If you've ever sacrificed years just to be seen only to realize you were never truly looked at, share your story below. You never know who needs to hear it. But as the tears dried, I realized something else. I wasn't crying because I was weak. I was crying because I was finally strong enough to let go. And this was what healing sounded like. It wasn't loud. It wasn't triumphant. It was quiet, deliberate, and fiercely mine. 2 days later, I was back at work on paper anyway. I showed up at 8:00 sharp, greeted my team, answered emails, and hit all the metrics that made me look like the efficient, put-together woman my office believed I was. But inside, I was unraveling in the most careful, calculated way. Every small act, clicking through spreadsheets, pouring coffee, making polite conversation, felt like a barrier between who I had to be in the world and what I had just endured. And yet the one thing I didn't feel anymore was doubt. For the first time in my life, I wasn't wondering whether I had overreacted. I wasn't spinning in mental loops about whether I was being too sensitive or too selfish. The voice that used to whisper, "Maybe you misunderstood," had gone silent. I knew exactly what I heard. I knew what it meant. And I knew in my bones that leaving had been the only choice. Then came Friday. I had just gotten home, kicked off my heels, let the week fall off my shoulders when my phone rang. It was my father. For a moment, I stared at the screen. I didn't feel fear, just a strange sense of finality. I let it ring out. A minute later, another call, this time my mom. Then a text. "Call us now." I didn't respond. Then Kyle. "You're seriously making this a thing. It was just a conversation." There it was. Just a conversation. Not a plan to defraud me, not an attempt to manipulate me into debt, not a betrayal, just a conversation. As if the words "will make Rachel pay for everything" were a casual hypothetical tossed into the air like confetti. As if I hadn't stood in the hallway pressed against the wall and felt every piece of my trust disintegrate. I didn't answer any of them. But I knew it was only a matter of time before things escalated. I didn't have to wait long. That Saturday, I got a call from Aunt Valerie, my father's sister. Her voice was warm, familiar. I had always liked her. She was one of the few people in the family who had ever truly seen me. "Rachel, sweetie," she began, "your parents are very upset. They said you disappeared without a word. They're worried sick." Of course they were. That was the version of the story they were already telling. I sighed. Did they mention Kyle's debt or the plan to have me take out a loan to cover it? Silence. They mentioned some ideas, she said carefully, but it all sounded like miscommunication. You know how your dad can be. He didn't mean anything by it. I almost laughed. He didn't mean anything by it. Why was it always my job to interpret their failures through the most generous lens? I thanked her for the call, kept it polite, and hung up. But I knew what came next. They were building a narrative, Rachel, the ungrateful daughter. Rachel, the runaway. Rachel, who couldn't take a joke, who couldn't support her family when it really mattered. And sure enough, within days, the messages started coming in. My cousin David, hey, heard you left your mom's birthday without saying goodbye. Everything okay? A family friend, your parents are worried. You really scared them. Even my childhood piano teacher left a voicemail. I don't know what happened, but I hope you come home soon. Family is everything. But they didn't know the truth, because no one had asked. And that's when I realized I had spent my whole life trying to be understood by people who had no interest in listening. So I made a choice. I opened my laptop and started drafting an email. It wasn't angry, it wasn't bitter. It was clear. I outlined what I heard. The plan to use my income and credit to bail out Kyle. The manipulation, the silence, the betrayal. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I just told the truth. And then I hit send to the few people who mattered. My grandmother, my Aunt Valerie, my cousin Ellie. The people who had once made me believe family could be something soft, something safe. Because the truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to be heard. And I was done whispering. By Sunday morning, I had 27 unread messages and a voicemail box that had maxed out overnight. The narrative had shifted. No longer was I just overreacting. Now I was destroying the family. They said I was dramatic, selfish, ungrateful, and in the same breath, they were still hoping I'd change my mind. But the thing about cutting someone off, especially family, is that it never feels clean. It doesn't matter how justified you are. It doesn't matter how clear the betrayal. There's always a phantom weight tugging at your chest. Because even if the connection was toxic, it was still connection. And walking away from that, it cost something. But I wasn't about to pay that cost in silence anymore. I got a text from my cousin Ellie around noon. Just read your email. I believe you, and I'm sorry. She didn't try to rationalize anything. She didn't ask for more details. She didn't question my decision. She just offered belief, and that more than anything was what I needed. Then later that afternoon came the unexpected. My grandmother Rose called. Her voice was shaky but determined. I always saw how they treated you differently, she whispered. I said something once years ago. Your mother brushed it off, said you were just stronger. Stronger. That word again. It had always been the excuse, hadn't it? You're strong. You can handle it. You're so mature, as if strength was an armor I was born with. As if I hadn't built it out of necessity piece by painful piece, while waiting for anyone to notice I was breaking beneath it. I should have done more, Grandma said quietly. I should have stood up for you. My throat tightened. Thank you, I said, because it was all I could manage. And then, almost as if the universe had been waiting for that small crack of light, more messages trickled in. My Uncle Brian, a family friend from church, even my old high school teacher. They'd seen the favoritism. They'd noticed the patterns. They'd just never thought it was their place to say anything. But now that I had spoken up, now that I had written it all down without shame, they were beginning to speak too. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was the problem. I felt like I was the proof. Proof that silence breaks when someone finally chooses to break it. Later that night, I curled up on my couch, the city lights painting soft gold across my hardwood floor. My inbox was still full of noise, but my heart felt quiet. I knew there would be more fallout. I hadn't even begun to deal with my parents directly. And Kyle? He was still out there, still living, like consequences were optional. But I had made a choice. I would not apologize for protecting myself. If you've ever been labeled the difficult one, just for setting a boundary, leave a comment. Because maybe you weren't difficult at all. Maybe you were just done being ignored. That night, I drafted another letter, this time to myself. It was short, just 3 lines. I'm allowed to walk away. I'm allowed to protect my peace. I don't owe anyone my silence. I folded it and placed it on my nightstand, a small monument to the woman I was becoming. Because I hadn't just left the house that weekend. I had left the role they wrote for me, and I was finally free to write my own. If this story is starting to echo something inside, you don't scroll past it. Subscribe, leave your voice in the comments, and stay with me. Because what comes next changes everything. Monday morning hit different. It wasn't just the sunlight through the curtains or the absence of my mother's early calls. It was the silence, the liberating kind. The kind that comes after you finally stop waiting for someone else to understand your worth. I brewed my coffee a little slower, sat at my small dining table, and opened the lease contract I'd found over the weekend. A downtown loft just a few blocks from the art gallery where I worked. Exposed brick, big windows, and most importantly, no memories tied to it. No guilt soaked into the walls, just space, mine. As I signed my name on the document, I paused just for a second. There was a time I would have called my mom before making any decision. Even after all the subtle jabs and passive comments I still used to seek her approval like it was oxygen. But not today. Today I was choosing me. A few hours later I got a text from Kyle, "Heard you're ghosting the family. Real classy sis." I stared at it, not even angry anymore, just tired. And then I made another decision. I blocked his number. Let him stew in the silence he'd left me in for years. But the real test came that evening when I got home and found an envelope taped to my apartment door. No name, no handwriting on the front. Just a single white envelope sealed. Inside a check. Made out to me. $27,500. And a sticky note. "This was yours anyway. Don't tell your mom I gave it to you." "Dad?" I sat down hard. I hadn't seen or heard from my father in nearly 6 months since he told me to quit acting like a victim at Thanksgiving. That night, I'd walked out and never looked back. And now this. Blood money. That's what it felt like. An apology without words, without eye contact, without accountability. He thought this check could fix everything. That cash could rewrite memories. That I would cash it, and we could pretend the years of emotional absenteeism had a price tag. But I didn't want money. I wanted honesty. I wanted someone to say, "I'm sorry I let them hurt you." I stared at the check, my mind whirling. I could use it to finally pay off the last of my student debt. Or I could rip it in half, send a photo to him, and make a point. But in that moment, I realized something even deeper. This wasn't a test of morality. It was a test of freedom. Could I take what was mine, what I was owed, without feeling guilty? Could I stop thinking of self-preservation as revenge? I folded the check and set it inside a drawer. Not cashed. Not destroyed. Just put away until I decided, on my terms. Because this wasn't about reacting anymore. It was about reclaiming. I didn't need to scream to be heard. I didn't need to beg to be seen. I was writing my own story now. One act at a time. And the next chapter, it wasn't going to include anyone who thought their silence was harmless. If you've ever been handed an apology wrapped in money, and it made you feel emptier, tell me, what did you do? Let's talk about the cost of silence in the comments. Hoi ChatGPT. A week later, I walked into my new place for the first time. No welcome mat. No framed photos. Just blank walls, clean hardwood, and sunlight pouring through the windows like an invitation. It was quiet. Not the anxious silence of my childhood home where you could feel judgment brewing behind every closed door, but real silence. The kind that asks nothing of you, that lets you breathe. I dropped my keys on the counter and exhaled. For the first time in years, I wasn't someone's backup plan. I wasn't the emotional mule of the family. I was just me. Madison Green. A woman in her 30s. Independent. Tired, sure, but finally whole. But peace doesn't last long when your past still has your address. 2 nights in, I got a voicemail from my mom. Her voice was cold, clipped. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but Kyle told me what you did. You're embarrassing us. Again. No context, no specifics, just blame." I deleted the message. I didn't even flinch. Then 30 minutes later, another. This time softer. "Almost sweet Madison, honey. We're still your family. I don't know what you think we've done, but we just want to talk. Please call me back." Ah, there it was. The cycle. Criticize, guilt, bait, repeat. I didn't fall for it. But then came the email from Kyle's wife. "You think you're so righteous, but everyone knows you've always been jealous. Mom gave Kyle the car because he needed it. You just hold grudges. Don't come to Dad's birthday party. Seriously." I read it twice. Jealous. Of a man who never lifted a finger unless it benefited him. Of a family that only called when they needed a favor. No, I wasn't jealous. I was done. And yet that email reminded me of something deeper, how long I had internalized their version of me. How long I had shaped my choices to avoid being seen as difficult, too sensitive, ungrateful. But here's the truth, setting boundaries isn't betrayal. Silence isn't maturity when it protects toxicity. I printed that email and tacked it to my fridge. A reminder, not of them but of me. Of how far I'd come. Because old me, she would have replied. She would have apologized for making them uncomfortable with her honesty. Knew me, she made a dinner reservation, for one, at the nicest rooftop restaurant in the city. Because I had something to celebrate freedom. I went alone, wore the dress my mother said wasn't flattering, and ordered the steak she used to call unladylike. I raised my glass to the skyline and whispered, "Happy birthday, Dad." Not bitter, just done. And when the waiter asked, "Are you celebrating something?" I smiled. "Yes," I said, "a beginning." If you've ever celebrated cutting ties like it was a rebirth, tell me below. What was your moment of freedom? Let's give each other the courage to toast ourselves. 3 weeks passed. I thought the storm had quieted. I thought maybe, just maybe, the silence from my family meant they'd accepted my decision to walk away. I was wrong. One afternoon, as I stepped out of a client meeting, my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. I let it ring. Then came another, and another, all different numbers, all unknown. I finally answered the fourth one only to hear my father's voice. Flat, cold, businesslike. "Madison, your mother and I have decided to pursue legal recourse." I blinked. "Excuse me. We raised you, paid for your college, let you live under our roof, and now you've made it your mission to divide this family. That car was never yours to sell. Kyle had the right to use it. Your actions were selfish and frankly we're done being taken advantage of." I could hardly process it. Legal recourse, for reclaiming what was rightfully mine. I asked one simple question: "Are you suing me?" His answer, a pause. "Then we're consulting an attorney." Click. I stood there on the sidewalk stunned. Not because I didn't expect pettiness, but because I realized just how far they were willing to go to punish me for not being their pawn anymore. They were really going to sue their own daughter over a car I owned, paid for, and insured just because I reclaimed it from Kyle. And for what? To force me back into silence, to teach me a lesson. I went home and pulled every document I had. Title insurance, text messages, even photos. Everything that showed the car was mine. Everything that proved I had every right to do what I did. But it wasn't the car they were fighting for. It was control. They weren't mad about the vehicle. They were mad they couldn't guilt me anymore. They were furious that I'd stopped playing the role of the obliging daughter, that I'd sold the symbol of their power and made a statement they couldn't ignore. That night, as I reviewed every paper with my attorney, she looked up and said, "You're not the first. They're banking on fear, on you backing down. Don't." I didn't. Instead, I filed a cease and desist. I shut down the threats before they became lawsuits, and I sent one final message, formal, brief, and ice cold. Any further communication outside of legal counsel will be considered harassment. But here's the twist. The next day, Kyle's wife posted on Facebook a long, dramatic post about how some people tear families apart and care more about their egos than forgiveness. Her friends rushed to comment. The narrative had been set. I was the villain. And for the first time ever, I didn't care. Let them play the sympathy card. Let them paint me as the heartless daughter who sold the car and broke the family, because I knew the truth. And that truth, it was enough. If you've ever been painted as the villain just for saying no, just for reclaiming your voice, drop a comment. I see you. I believe you. And maybe it's time we stop explaining ourselves to people committed to misunderstanding us. And if this moment feels familiar, if you've ever faced a storm for simply choosing yourself, don't leave without hitting that subscribe button. This space is for the ones who finally said, enough. Let's keep telling our stories because silence only helps those who hurt us. I didn't know how quiet could be so loud until I cut off my family. No more phone calls, no more family group chats, no holiday texts, no surprise pop-ins from Kyle needing a favor, just silence. And yet every hour I felt the weight of their absence pressing against my chest like a phantom limb. For the first time in my life, I was free and lonely. I had always feared that choosing myself meant being alone. I'd been conditioned to believe that family, no matter how dysfunctional, was better than solitude. But here's what I learned. There's a big difference between being alone and being at peace. At first, the quiet was unbearable. I'd check my phone instinctively, half expecting a message from Mom, begging for just a talk. I'd drive past our childhood church on Sundays and catch myself glancing at the parking lot, hoping to see their car. I even found myself hovering over Kyle's social media, wondering if they were trashing me in some cryptic post again. But after 2 weeks, something shifted. I stopped looking for them. I stopped checking the family's Facebook page. I stopped second-guessing my decision. I poured myself into work, joined a local hiking group, even took a weekend trip to Arizona, just me, a cabin, and the red rocks. And that trip changed everything. Because one morning, hiking solo through Sedona's trails, the sun rising behind the cliffs, I realized something so simple, yet so freeing. I wasn't broken, I wasn't the selfish one, I was just finally healing. My family had made me believe for years that any boundary I set was a betrayal, that love meant sacrifice without limit, that saying no made me cruel. But here, miles away from their noise, surrounded by nothing but stillness and sky, I understood love without respect isn't love at all. When I returned home, something strange happened. One of my dad's old friends, Mr. Jennings, called me. He said he'd heard what happened and didn't want to get in the middle of family stuff, but he just wanted me to know. He was proud of me. I watched you grow up, Madison. You were always the one trying to keep the peace, always apologizing, even when it wasn't your fault. It takes guts to stop. Don't let them drag you back. I cried after that call. Not because I was sad, but because someone saw me. Really saw me? Not as the difficult daughter or selfish sister, but as a woman who had spent too many years shrinking herself to keep the peace. That night I did something bold. I started a journal. Not just any journal, but one where I wrote down every time I'd been gaslit, guilt-tripped, or coerced into silence by my family. I called it the Unsaid Book. And on the very last page, in big bold letters, I wrote, "I deserve peace, and I won't apologize for choosing it." I still don't know if I'll ever speak to them again. But I do know this: I'm no longer waiting for an apology to move forward. I'm no longer pretending it didn't hurt just to make them comfortable. And if you've ever had to build peace from pieces, if you've had to rebuild your heart without the ones who broke it, leave a comment. I want you to know you are not crazy, not cruel, and not alone. And if this story feels like yours, hit that like button and subscribe. Let's keep reclaiming our voices together. Because healing isn't loud, but it's the most powerful rebellion of all. 3 months after cutting ties, something unexpected happened. I received a letter. A real one, handwritten, postmarked from Oregon. No name, just my address. My stomach twisted as I opened it, bracing for some emotional grenade. But it wasn't from my parents. It wasn't from Kyle. It was from my grandmother. She had passed away nearly a year ago. The envelope was dated just a few weeks before she died. Inside was a single sheet of paper in her delicate cursive. Madison. If you're reading this, then things have likely gone the way I feared. I always hoped your parents would wake up and see your worth. But if they haven't, then it's time you know something I never told you. Love, Grandma. Attached was a legal document, an amendment to her will. She had quietly changed the beneficiary of a sizable property she owned in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It wasn't much compared to the family's inherited trust, but it was hers alone. And now, it was mine. She wrote, "This land is for you, not to sell, not to rent, to rest, to remember you are whole, you are loved, you are enough." I didn't realize I was crying until the ink blurred on her signature. That weekend I drove up to the property. It was a modest cabin surrounded by acres of pine and wildflowers. The porch creaked, the windows were dusty, but it felt safe, like a hug in wood and stone. I stayed the entire weekend. No internet, no phone, just me, my thoughts, and the quiet echo of her voice reminding me that someone believed in me even if the rest of them never had. It felt like she knew, like she had been watching the cracks form in our family long before I admitted they existed. And even in death, she reached out to give me what no one else had, a place of my own, untouched by manipulation or guilt. When I got back to town, I couldn't keep the cabin a secret. I invited a few friends over, real friends. People who knew my story, who didn't flinch when I shared the ugliest parts of it. One of them, Jordan, brought a bottle of wine and whispered, "You have no idea how many of us are surviving family wounds in silence." We sat on the porch overlooking the trees, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like a builder of new memories, new relationships, new meaning. The next morning I started sketching ideas, not for a business, not for revenge, for a retreat. A space for people like me, people who had to walk away from the people who were supposed to love them. A weekend of healing art, bonfires, journaling. A place to remember who we are without the shame others layered on us. It started as a doodle in my notebook. But as I drove back home, I knew this wasn't just a dream. It was a mission. Because if I had felt this alone, this broken, this gaslit for so long, there had to be others. Dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands. People still stuck at that dinner table, still shrinking under judgment, still convincing themselves they were the problem. And I wanted to build a space where they could breathe. Not explain, not justify, just exist. I used my savings. I filed paperwork. I found a therapist willing to volunteer monthly workshops. I created a website. And within 2 months, we booked our first 5 guests. All women, all with stories that sounded hauntingly like mine. They cried, they laughed, they painted, they shared. And one night, sitting by the fire pit, one of them said, "Madison, you didn't just build a cabin. You built a second chance." And I realized she was right. Because this wasn't just about me reclaiming peace. It was about multiplying it. If you've ever felt like you had to choose between your family and your sanity, please know you're not alone. Drop your story below or just say, "Me too." And if you want to help others find their second chance, consider subscribing. Let's build a community where no one has to heal alone. Because what we build after the breaking, that's where the real legacy begins. Years after the silence began, life started to feel less like a battlefield and more like a journey I was steering with my own hands. I had built a life on my own terms, career, friendships, a home filled with laughter and love that I chose. But the scars from the past, they were still there, quiet reminders beneath the surface. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. Familiar handwriting, Kyle's. At first, I hesitated to open it. Part of me wanted to burn it unread. Part of me hoped he had changed. With a deep breath, I unfolded the paper. He wrote about his struggles, about the debts that had nearly destroyed him, the years of therapy, the hard road to sobriety from gambling. He admitted his mistakes, the ways he had hurt me, and the pain of watching me walk away. There was no demand for forgiveness, no excuses, just an apology and a hope. A hope that maybe one day we could find some common ground. I read the letter 3 times that day. Each time the anger softened a little, the pain dulled. Could he be sincere? Was change possible? That night I called my therapist. "I'm torn," I confessed. Part of me wants to believe him. Part of me is scared to open that door. She smiled gently. "There's no right answer, Madison. There's only what feels right for you. Healing isn't linear, it's messy. You get to choose your pace." After weeks of reflection and conversations, I decided to write back. A short note, careful and honest. "Thank you for reaching out. I'm glad you're working on yourself. I'm not ready to reconnect fully yet, but I appreciate your honesty. Please respect my boundaries." Kyle's reply was immediate and understanding. From there, our communication grew slowly: texts, occasional calls, and finally a video chat months later. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward silences and old wounds peeking through. But beneath it all, there was a new respect built on honesty, accountability, and space. I realized forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or excusing the past. It was about freeing myself from its hold. And even if the relationship never fully healed, I was no longer chained to resentment. That peace, it was worth everything. If you've ever faced a fractured family and wondered if healing is possible, share your story below. Sometimes just knowing others are trying too can light the way. And if you believe in second chances, even messy, slow ones, join this journey by subscribing. Let's find strength in healing together. By the time I reached my mid-30s, I had fully embraced the life I fought so hard to build. New city, new friends, and a career that challenged and fulfilled me. But even with success and independence, the shadows of my past family still flickered at the edges of my mind. I often found myself reflecting on the lessons that pain had carved into me. Growing up in a home where love was conditional had taught me resilience, but it also taught me boundaries. More than anything, I learned the importance of choosing who truly deserved a place in my life. That realization brought a transformation I hadn't expected. I started volunteering with a nonprofit organization that supported women leaving toxic families. Sharing my story helped others, but it also helped me heal in ways I hadn't imagined. I saw strength in vulnerability, and I learned that healing was not a destination, but a continuous journey. At one of the group meetings, a young woman named Emily caught my attention. She was hesitant to speak, her voice trembling as she recounted her experiences with a controlling family. After the session, we talked for hours. Her story mirrored mine in many ways: years of neglect, manipulation, and the struggle to reclaim her worth. We became close friends, bonded not just by pain but by hope. Together, we started organizing workshops focused on financial independence, emotional resilience, and self-care for women rebuilding their lives. We named it the Phoenix Project, rising from the ashes stronger than before. Through this work, I found purpose beyond my personal healing. I realized that my story wasn't just about survival, it was about empowerment and giving back. One afternoon during a workshop, I shared a powerful truth. You don't have to stay in a family that diminishes you. Love is not supposed to hurt, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. The room was silent, then filled with nods and tears. That moment reminded me that our worth isn't defined by those who fail to see it. It's forged in the courage to choose ourselves. Over time, I also found peace with my family's absence. I accepted that some relationships may never heal, and that was okay. Healing doesn't always mean reconciliation, it can mean freedom. And with that freedom came joy. Joy in friendships built on trust. Joy in a home filled with laughter and understanding. Joy in knowing I was enough just as I was. If you're on your own path to healing or considering walking away from toxic ties, know this: you are not alone. Share your story in the comments, and let's build a community where self-love is the foundation. If this message speaks to you, subscribe and join us. Together we rise. It was nearly 5 years since I'd last spoken to my family. 5 years since I made the hardest decision of my life, to walk away from the people who were supposed to love and protect me, but instead used me as a resource and a scapegoat. The silence between us was heavy, filled with years of unanswered questions and unspoken pain. But in that silence, I found something I had never truly known before: peace. One day, out of the blue, I received an email from Kyle. It was short, cautiously worded, and free from any demands or accusations. He had been sober for over a year and was trying to rebuild his life. He wanted to meet, not to erase the past or seek forgiveness, but to try to understand, and maybe, just maybe, rebuild a connection as adults. The message was tentative, hopeful, but most importantly, respectful. I stared at the email for a long time. My heart ached with old wounds that had never fully healed, yet a part of me was curious to see if the person who had caused so much pain could become someone different. Could forgiveness be possible, even if only partial? Could we find a new way to relate that wasn't bound by resentment or betrayal? After days of reflection and conversations with my therapist, I replied. I told him I was willing to meet, but that it would be on my terms. No rushing, no expectations, just honesty and boundaries. The day of our meeting, I felt a swirl of emotions: anxiety, hope, fear. When I saw him sitting there in a simple t-shirt, no longer the smug kid I remembered, I realized how much time had passed and how much had changed. We talked for hours, not about blaming or defending, but about what we had lost, what we had learned, and what we wanted moving forward. It was awkward at times, raw at others, but beneath it all was a tentative respect. It didn't magically fix everything. We didn't erase the past, but it opened a door, a fragile, hopeful door that neither of us was sure how far it would lead. Through that conversation, I learned the most important lesson of all: family is not just the people you're born to, it's the people who respect your boundaries, honor your worth, and choose to stand with you. I've since surrounded myself with chosen family friends, mentors, and partners who see me, support me, and love me without conditions. My biological family taught me painful lessons, but they never defined me. The power to claim my worth was always mine. If my story speaks to you, if you're standing at a crossroads with toxic family dynamics, know this: walking away is not betrayal. It's self-preservation. Setting boundaries is an act of courage. Healing is your right. Share your journey in the comments. Your voice might be the light someone else needs to find their way. And if you believe in the power of choice and healing, subscribe to join a community that stands for self-love, resilience, and freedom. Thank you for listening. Remember, your worth is never determined by those who fail to see it, and the greatest victory is claiming your life on your own terms. Healing is never a straight path. It twists and turns, sometimes pulling us back into old wounds before we can truly move forward. But healing also teaches us about strength, the kind of strength that isn't loud or flashy, but quiet and steady. The strength to stand alone, to set boundaries, and to choose peace over chaos. My journey taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, support, and love that lifts rather than confines. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away from the people who were supposed to protect us, because protecting ourselves is the first step to freedom. If you are trapped in toxic relationships, remember you have the right to protect your peace. You have the right to say no, to set boundaries, and to choose your own happiness. It's okay to prioritize yourself. It's okay to seek healing and to build a new family of friends and allies who truly see and value you. Thank you for being part of this story. If my experience has touched you, please subscribe and share your own story below. Together, we can create a community where healing, courage, and self-love thrive. Because none of us should have to walk this journey alone. Remember, your worth is not defined by those who fail to see it. You are enough, you are worthy, and your story matters. Let's keep moving forward one brave step at a time.